What if He-Man was never really made to inspire kids, but to sell them something? Behind the muscles, the power sword, and the heroic speeches was a toy company gamble born from missed opportunities, censorship rules, strange hidden lore, and marketing pressure. The cartoon that looked like pure fantasy may have been one of the smartest sales machines of the 80s. And once you know how He-Man was really built, Eternia starts looking very different. Mattel missed the Star Wars toy boom. Before He-Man lifted the power sword, Mattel was haunted by the toy deal it did not have. In the late 70s, Star Wars exploded into a merchandising empire, and Kenner became the company sitting on a gold mine. Kids were not just watching movies anymore, they were recreating entire universes on bedroom floors. Mattel understood the message very quickly. The future of toys was not just action figures, it was mythology. So, when Masters of the Universe began taking shape, it was not simply a fantasy idea. It was a business counterattack. Mattel needed a world big enough to rival spaceships, villains, castles, monsters, weapons, and endless imagination. He-Man became their muscular answer to a market they had watched someone else dominate. That makes his origin strangely dramatic. One of the most powerful heroes of the 80s was born partly from corporate regret. The toys came before the cartoon. The strangest thing about He-Man is that the cartoon was not the beginning, it was the sales engine. Before millions of children heard, "By the power of Grayskull," the action figures were already the real product. Mattel had built the toys first. Muscular heroes, monstrous villains, strange vehicles, and Castle Grayskull itself. But toys need stories. A kid might pick up a figure once, but a cartoon could make that figure feel alive forever. That is where the animated series came in. It gave every plastic warrior a voice, a mission, a rivalry, and a reason to be bought. To children, it looked like fantasy adventure. To toy executives, it was a weekly advertisement disguised as entertainment. And that is why He-Man became such a turning point. The show did not just support the toys, it taught an entire industry how to sell imagination. He-Man was almost a wandering barbarian. The He-Man most people remember was noble, heroic, and bright, but his early version was much rougher. Before Prince Adam, royal secrets, and moral lessons, the character leaned closer to a wandering fantasy warrior. He looked like he belonged in a harsher world of monsters, weapons, and survival. That version made sense for the early 80s, when sword and sorcery imagery was everywhere. But Mattel needed something bigger than a barbarian. They needed a character parents would accept, children would worship, and stores could sell without panic. So He-Man slowly shifted away from pure savage warrior energy and towards superhero mythology. He became less of a brutal fighter and more of a clean, heroic protector. That pivot changed everything. The wild barbarian concept might have sold some toys, but the polished hero became a legend. He-Man was softened just enough to conquer childhood. The early mini-comics had completely different lore. Before the cartoon locked He-Man into pop culture history, his world was far stranger and less familiar. The early mini-comics packaged with the toys did not present the exact Eternia most fans know today. In those stories, the mythology felt rougher, more mysterious, and less organized. Prince Adam was not yet the central secret identity in the way the cartoon later made famous. He-Man came across more like an independent warrior, moving through a dangerous fantasy world rather than a royal prince hiding behind a softer personality. That matters because it proves the franchise was still being invented in public. Kids were not just buying toys, they were watching a mythology mutate from package inserts into television legend. The cartoon did not simply adapt the story, it rewrote it. The He-Man millions remember was not the first He-Man. He was the version that survived. He-Man's mother was an astronaut from Earth. One of the weirdest He-Man facts sounds less like fantasy and more like science fiction. Queen Marlena, Prince Adam's mother, was not originally just another royal figure from Eternia. In key versions of the lore, she was an astronaut from Earth who crash-landed on Eternia and eventually became queen. That means He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe, has a connection to our world. Suddenly, the fantasy kingdom is not completely separate from reality. There is a human thread running straight into Castle Grayskull's mythology. It also makes Prince Adam more unusual than he appears. He is not just Eternian royalty, he is partly tied to Earth through his mother. That hidden sci-fi detail adds a strange layer to a show many people remember as simple sword and magic adventure. Eternia was never just another fantasy planet. It had Earth in its bloodline. Prince Adam was added to give him a secret identity. He-Man did not always need Prince Adam, but television did. A toy warrior can simply exist as a powerful figure, but a cartoon hero needs contrast. That is why Prince Adam became so important. He gave the story a classic superhero structure. The harmless-looking royal who secretly transforms into the strongest hero alive. Without Adam, He-Man was just muscle and weapons. With Adam, he became a fantasy version of the secret identity myth. Kids could imagine themselves as ordinary one moment and unstoppable the next. The transformation scene turned the toy into a wish. That is why the raised sword, the glowing power, and the thunderous declaration became unforgettable. Prince Adam made He-Man more than a fighter. He made him a transformation fantasy. The genius was not just that He-Man was strong, it was that strength was hidden inside someone everyone underestimated. Skeletor originally held half the power sword. The power sword was not always just He-Man's shining symbol of heroism. In early versions of the mythology, the sword had a stranger, more divided meaning. He-Man possessed one half, while Skeletor had the other. That detail made their rivalry feel much more personal and mythic. They were not just hero and villain fighting over castles and kingdoms. They were two opposing forces connected by the same source of power. The idea also gave the toy line a clever visual hook. Weapons, halves, secrets, and combinations are perfect for children's imagination. But as the cartoon mythology developed, the sword became more closely associated with He-Man's transformation and moral power. Still, the older version remains fascinating because it makes Skeletor feel less like a random villain and more like a corrupted mirror of He-Man. In the beginning, even the sword had a dark side. The cartoon avoided real violence because of censorship. For a hero with a giant sword, He-Man was surprisingly careful about how he fought. The original cartoon had to operate under strict children's television standards, so the action could look exciting without becoming too violent. He-Man could throw enemies, knock them away, break objects, lift boulders, and smash machines, but the show avoided showing him seriously injuring living opponents. That created one of the strangest contradictions in 80s animation. The most powerful man in the universe carried a sword he almost never used like a real weapon. Instead, the show leaned on cartoon-safe combat, dramatic speeches, and moral lessons. To kids, it still felt thrilling. To adults looking back, it feels like a bizarre balancing act between selling action figures and avoiding parental outrage. He-Man was marketed as a warrior, but on television he had to fight like a role model. The movie used robots, so heroes could destroy enemies safely. When He-Man moved into live action, the violence problem followed him. The 1987 Masters of the Universe movie needed bigger action than the cartoon, but it still had to be acceptable for a family audience. The solution was simple and strangely revealing. Fill Skeletor's forces with robotic troops. If heroes blasted, smashed, or destroyed robots, the movie could deliver spectacle without showing human casualties. It was a clever workaround, but it also exposed the franchise's biggest tension. He-Man looked like a sword-swinging warrior, yet the brand still had to protect its kid-friendly image. Robots became the perfect targets because they could be destroyed without guilt. That choice says a lot about how carefully He-Man was managed. Even when the story got darker and more cinematic, the violence had to be cleaned up. In Eternia, even destruction needed a marketing-safe excuse. The show was rushed and reused animation constantly. If He-Man sometimes looked like he was running through the same motion again and again, that was not your imagination. The original cartoon was made fast, and Filmation became famous for reusing animation to keep production moving. Characters often ran, turned, punched, pointed, or reacted in familiar ways because recycled movement saved time and money. But here is the surprising part. Those shortcuts became part of the show's identity. The repeated transformation pose, the familiar heroic stances, and the dramatic stock movements made He-Man feel ritualistic. Kids did not see budget-saving techniques. They saw iconic moments repeating like magic spells. The show's limitations accidentally created its style. In a strange way, the rushed production helped make He-Man memorable. What might look cheap today became visual comfort back then. Eternia was built quickly, but those repeated images burned themselves into a generation's memory. He-Man and She-Ra are twins. The most powerful man in the universe had an equally powerful secret. He was not the only one. He-Man's sister, Adora, would become She-Ra, Princess of Power, creating one of the most important expansions of the franchise. The twin connection made the mythology feel bigger, more emotional, and more dramatic. This was not just a spin-off created to sell more toys, although it definitely helped do that. It also gave the world of Masters of the Universe a family tragedy and a heroic mirror. Adam and Adora were separated, raised in different worlds, and eventually connected by destiny. She-Ra allowed the franchise to reach a wider audience while still keeping the same fantasy formula of transformation, power, and moral courage. The twist worked because it felt both personal and commercial. He-Man was not just a lone champion. He was part of a royal legacy. Dolph Lundgren disliked playing He-Man. For many fans, playing He-Man sounds like a dream role, but for Dolph Lundgren, it became a career headache. The 1987 live-action Masters of the Universe movie put him in the blonde hair, armor, and muscles of Eternia's biggest hero, but the film did not become the blockbuster fantasy event the studio hoped for. Over the years, Lundgren has been open about his complicated feelings toward the role, often treating it as one of the less satisfying parts of his career, and you can understand why. The movie had ambition, but it struggled with budget limits, tonal confusion, and the impossible task of turning a toy-driven cartoon into convincing live-action fantasy. For Lundgren, He-Man was not a crown jewel. It was a strange Hollywood experiment that followed him around. The role gave him immortality in pop culture, but not always the kind actors dream about. He-Man became a gay icon through fan interpretation. One of the most unexpected parts of He-Man's legacy is how differently adults later read the character. What looked like straightforward children's fantasy in the 80s eventually became a subject of cultural discussion. Some critics and fans interpreted He-Man's exaggerated body, dramatic poses, bright costumes, secret identity, and intense male friendships as carrying homoerotic subtext or unintentional queer-coded energy. That does not mean the original creators were necessarily building that message on purpose. It means the character became bigger than the intent behind him. Pop culture often changes meaning as audiences change. He-Man was designed to sell power, heroism, and fantasy, but later viewers found camp, identity, humor, and symbolism in him too. That is why he still gets discussed beyond cartoons and toys. He-Man did not only survive as nostalgia, he became a cultural mirror, reflecting things the original show probably never expected. The cartoon was basically a toy commercial revolution. He-Man did not just sell toys, he helped rewrite the rules of children's television. The cartoon gave Mattel exactly what toy companies dreamed of: a weekly story machine that made every figure feel important. A child did not just see Beastman on a shelf, they had seen him threaten Eternia. They did not just want Castle Grayskull, they knew it was the mysterious center of power. That connection between screen and toy box was incredibly powerful. It also made the show controversial because critics saw it as advertising aimed directly at children. But from a business perspective, it was brilliant. He-Man proved that a toy line could become a television universe, and that a television universe could sell even more toys. The model would influence countless 80s franchises. Behind the fantasy was a machine, and that machine helped turn childhood entertainment into a merchandising empire. He-Man changed children's TV forever. The wildest He-Man fact is not one hidden detail, it is the size of the impact. He-Man became more than a cartoon, more than an action figure, and more than an 80s memory. He helped create a new formula where toys, television, comics, vehicles, castles, villains, spin-offs, and catchphrases all work together as one giant brand universe. That might sound normal now, but at the time, it was a major shift. He-Man showed companies that children did not just want characters. They wanted worlds they could enter, collect, repeat, and control. That changed how studios and toy companies thought about animation. It also changed how childhood imagination was packaged and sold. Whether you see He-Man as a heroic icon or a brilliant marketing machine, his legacy is impossible to ignore. The secret of Grayskull was not just power. It was profit, nostalgia, and total cultural takeover. So maybe He-Man was never just a cartoon hero. He was a toy store gamble, a censorship puzzle, a marketing machine, and a childhood icon wrapped in one muscle-bound legend. But now I want to know which fact changed how you see Eternia forever. Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more wild secrets behind classic pop culture.